My sister dropped her kids off at my house and demanded I babysit them for 8 weeks while she went on vacation. When I threatened to involve the police, she arranged for someone to assault me in my own home so she could take the kids back. Unlike real gold, children raised as golden rarely turn out as pure as their parents imagine. Growing up, my sister always got her way, no matter how nasty or irrational she acted. There were never any consequences. She was the golden miracle child, and she knew it. Part of it, I think, was because she was stunning. Thick curly hair, light eyes. My mom was obsessed with her appearance and never passed up a chance to compare us. I have dark eyes, straight hair, and was never considered pretty like her. Once we both hit our teenage years, the comparisons got worse. My mom constantly told me to dress like my sister and pressured her to teach me how to wear makeup, though any time I asked, my sister would mock me and make me feel small for even trying. We grew up resenting each other. She seemed to inherit all of our mother's worst traits, while I rejected them completely. Being placed on a pedestal her whole life just for being beautiful turned my sister into someone cold and entitled, someone who genuinely believes she can do whatever she wants and never face consequences. My mother's constant comparisons and put-downs damaged me deeply. As an adult, I'm quiet, reserved, and often described as a pushover. I've been going to therapy lately to build confidence and finally start standing up for myself. It's not easy, especially when it's the first time I've ever truly tried. The way my family treated me really messed with my ability to form healthy relationships. I struggle to maintain friendships or romantic connections because deep down, I don't believe I'm worth much. Back in high school, my sister even slept with my boyfriend during senior year, just because she could. She never even liked him, told me often that he was unattractive, but she still went after him. When my parents found out, they told me to let bygones be bygones. She wasn't punished at all. That was the moment I realized just how little they cared about me compared to her. And my dad? He just stood by, watching my mom emotionally tear me down for years. That silence taught me that men wouldn't protect me, wouldn't fight for me. And to this day, I find it hard to trust or open up in relationships. But despite it all, there was one upside to being the ugly sister. I had no social life. I had no parties to go to, no popularity to chase, so I studied. I graduated with a 4.0 GPA and earned a full scholarship to my dream university. I remember the night before I started high school. My mom told me she'd be paying for my sister's college because she was the oldest. As for me, I'd need to go to community college and pay my way through on my own. I cried, asking her why she didn't love me like she loved my sister. She insisted she did, but added that my sister deserved it more because she was her firstborn. The day I won that scholarship, I was ecstatic. For once, I had something my sister didn't. She had wasted high school partying, getting terrible grades, and somehow still got a pass from our parents. She was only going to college because they were footing the bill. And even then, it wasn't a great school. When I rushed home to tell my family about the scholarship, I'd never felt so proud, so hopeful. My dad simply said, "Good job." My mom didn't even look up from her phone. That entire week, she ignored me. I asked her why she was upset with me for getting a scholarship of all things, but she refused to look me in the eye and walked away, like she hated me for succeeding. That's when it hit me how alone I really was. How much they wanted me to feel like an outsider. And to this day, I don't understand why. Why even have me if you're going to make me feel like I was never wanted?
A lifetime of being hated by my own mother made me grow up hating myself. What should have been one of the happiest days of my life, the day I got my scholarship, ended up one of the worst. I cried myself to sleep that night, realizing I would never have the kind of love from my family that my sister had always been handed. And I hated her for it. Not just because she had it, but because she never appreciated it. That night, I stayed up until sunrise writing in my journal, thinking about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was done being the sad, overlooked girl begging her parents to notice her. I made a promise to myself that I would channel all my rage and grief into success. Instead of throwing myself a pity party, I would pour all of my energy into building a life they could never take credit for, a life they would never understand. I wasn't going to chase their love anymore. I was going to give myself something they never could: stability, independence, intelligence, and pride, even if I never knew what it felt like to be loved. So, that's exactly what I did. I graduated with honors, I landed an incredible position right after college with the company I had interned for, and by the time I turned 23, I was earning six figures. When I came home for the holidays, I'd share little pieces of my success. Extended family members would sometimes be impressed, offer compliments or kind words, but my own parents never made the effort to truly acknowledge me. Eventually, I learned to stop telling my mom anything at all. I knew that hearing about my success only made her bitter. I did once tell my dad about my job and salary, and one year he told me he was proud of me. That was probably the nicest thing either of my parents had ever said to me. But even now, my mom treats me like I'm an unwanted guest in her home. Even though I only visit during the holidays, she still goes out of her way to shift attention off of me if anyone dares to show interest in my life. I remember one Christmas dinner, my uncle brought up the promotion I had just received, the second one in 2 years, and I had mentioned earlier that day that I was thinking of buying my first home. A few of my cousins chimed in, congratulating me, asking questions. I started to answer when my mom abruptly cut in and said, "This is boring. Can we talk about something else?" Then, under her breath, I heard her mutter, "It's probably not even true anyway." That same year, I did buy my house. I posted about it on social media. Every single family member liked the post, except her. I knew why. My sister's life had taken a very different path. She went to college right after high school on my parents' dime, failed out, and got pregnant by a guy she'd only known for 4 months. I always suspected my parents pressured her to end the pregnancy, but she kept it and then tried to play house with the father even though they were completely incompatible. They thought a second baby might fix things. When I saw her pregnancy announcement for her second child, I nearly cried, not from jealousy, but from dread. I knew that baby was being born into a toxic situation, just like the first one. Her boyfriend was rude and dismissive. He couldn't even remember my name during holiday dinners and never made any effort to speak to me. Yet every year he'd show up with trays of food for himself and bring nothing for anyone else. My relationship with my sister didn't improve as we got older. In fact, once we'd both moved out, we stopped speaking altogether outside of seeing each other during the holidays and on social media. The rare times we did see each other, she'd find ways to cut me down. She'd make nasty remarks about my weight or my clothes, always finding something to pick at. I think it was projection, honestly. I wear designer pieces, switch up my purses, and take pride in how I present myself. She couldn't stand it. She'd say things like, "What fake purse did you bring this year?" while smirking at her phone. One Thanksgiving, I walked in and the first thing she said loudly in front of everyone was, "Wow, dressed up again like the stuck-up bitch you are." It was so aggressive, so unnecessary, and she didn't even care that her kids were standing right there and listening. She cursed and insulted me in front of them like it was normal.
I don't feel bad saying this. My sister is pure trash, and I don't regret a single thing I did after she dumped her kids on my doorstep out of nowhere. It was a quiet weekend morning, and I was just relaxing after a long work week. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was confused. When I opened the door, I was stunned to see her 2 boys, 10 and 7 years old, standing on my porch with overnight bags. I asked what they were doing there, and they told me their mom was going on vacation for 8 weeks and that I was watching them. 8 weeks. No notice, no call, nothing. I hadn't even spoken to my sister since our family's 4th of July barbecue when she told me not to take a second helping of food because she was sick of looking at my muffin top. And now, here she was, just assuming I'd be her unpaid babysitter for 2 months? The kids were quiet and clearly confused, so I let them in while I grabbed my phone and started calling her. She ignored the first 10 calls. I kept dialing until she finally picked up. The second she answered, I said flat out, "I'm not watching your kids. If you don't come pick them up, I'm calling CPS." I was literally Googling the number for Child Protective Services while I had her on speaker. Then her voice changed. It got low, cold, threatening. She said that if I didn't do what she wanted, she'd call my job and tell them I wasn't taking my bipolar medication, try to get me fired. It was a bluff, of course. She doesn't know anything about my job or what I do. But my career means everything to me, and the thought of anyone jeopardizing it, even someone as stupid as her, sent me spiraling. I hung up on her and sat there, trying not to lose it. My head was pounding. I couldn't think straight. Not only was I blindsided by her dumping her kids on me, but I had a major trip planned in a month, to Australia. I was finally going to meet my long-distance boyfriend Eric's family, and I had been looking forward to it all year.
It was supposed to be a big milestone for us. And now, all of it was on the verge of falling apart because of her. I didn't know who else to call, so I reached out to the one person I hoped might finally be on my side, my mom. Big mistake. I told her everything, that her sister hadn't even dropped the kids off herself, and that she was vanishing for 2 months with no plan and no conversation. Her response? They're old enough to come to your house alone anyway. Then she started guilt-tripping me, saying things like, your sister's done a lot for you. The least you can do is be there for her this one time. You never are. That's when I snapped. I screamed at her, demanded she name even one time my sister had ever done anything for me, just one. I told her that both she and my sister had spent their lives treating me like a stray dog instead of a daughter or sister, and now they expected me to magically turn into the dependable one. I told her to come to my house and deal with it herself. I wasn't going to cancel my trip for someone who didn't even respect me. If she cared so much about her perfect daughter, she could be the one to step up. When my mom finally arrived, her face was icy. Same disgusted look I'd seen my entire life. We sat in my living room, and she launched straight into another lecture about how I was a terrible sibling and how family shows up in times of need. I ignored all of it. I didn't care. Instead, I demanded the truth. What kind of vacation was my sister on that she just abandoned her kids like this? All the secrecy. Why disappear for 2 whole months and leave 2 young boys behind, without even a conversation? Then my mom's expression shifted. Her tone softened, and after a long pause, she finally admitted that my sister wasn't on a normal vacation. She was being flown out by her sugar daddy. At first, I laughed. I honestly thought it was a joke. But my mom wasn't smiling. She was dead serious. I was so emotionally drained at that point, so angry and betrayed and exhausted that I just exploded. I demanded to know how she could possibly be okay with this, how she could defend her daughter abandoning her children for nearly 2 months to go be some man's plaything, while gaslighting me for not stepping up.
I told my mother, point blank, that she had raised a complete failure of a daughter, a woman who ran off to another country to see her sugar daddy instead of getting a real job to support her kids. Of course, my mom didn't hear a word of it. She turned everything around on me, just like she always did, and came to my sister's defense again. At one point, she looked me dead in the face and said, "It doesn't matter how much money you have or how nice your house is. You'll always be the ugly duckling. You were born ugly and you'll die ugly." After she said that, it took everything in me not to grab her by the shirt and throw her out of my house myself. I screamed at her to get the hell out, and she screamed back that she wasn't going anywhere. When I tried to lead her out of the room, she shoved me, hard, straight into the coffee table. One of my favorite vases sat on that table. My boyfriend had gifted it to me on his last visit. When I hit the edge, the vase fell and shattered on the floor. I just stared at it, this beautiful thing in pieces, and something in me snapped. That broken vase felt like me, crushed, discarded, worthless. I had a full-on breakdown right then and there, screaming and sobbing, telling my mom to get out or I'd call the police. I feel awful about it in hindsight, because I know my nephews heard every word from the other room. But I couldn't hold it in anymore. I was done. Eventually, I managed to get my mom out of the house. A few minutes later, one of my nephews peeked his head out of the room. His eyes were wide, worried. "Is everything okay?" he asked. My heart broke seeing his face. These poor kids. They didn't deserve any of this. They were just confused little boys with a reckless, selfish mother. And despite not knowing them very well, I felt a wave of guilt and sadness. They were innocent. They didn't ask for any of this. So I ordered DoorDash. I let them watch movies and play video games in the living room until they fell asleep, curled up on the couch with snacks and blankets. Later that night, I finally got through to my sister again. As soon as I answered, I lost it. I demanded to know how she could upend my life like this with zero warning. I told her I was calling CPS for real this time. She just laughed, a low, sinister laugh. Then she repeated her threat, told me again that if I didn't play along, she'd call my job and claim I wasn't taking my bipolar medication. She said I had a choice, babysit her kids or lose everything. Then, in the cruelest voice, she hissed, "You're nothing without your job. You'll go back to being the loser you've always been." That hit me in a place I didn't want to admit existed. She was right, in some twisted way.
I did tie my self-worth to my career. I work hard for my degree, my position, and my independence, but deep down, I knew I clung to it like a life raft. I asked her, through tears, why? Why she hated me so much? Why she could abandon her own kids for a sugar daddy and threaten my livelihood in the same breath? She didn't even flinch. Just said, I can make millions in 2 months. That's something you'll never understand. She wanted to crush me, and she was getting there. After one final jab, she hung up. I broke down again. I felt powerless. She had all the leverage. The kids were in my living room. I couldn't leave, and I had no support from my family. I went upstairs, shut the door, and called the one person who had always been in my corner, my boyfriend, Eric. I hadn't even had a moment to talk to him since my sister dumped the kids on me, and as soon as I heard his voice, I broke down all over again. I told him everything, my sister's threats, my mom's cruelty, how trapped I felt. Even through the other side of the world, Eric made me feel heard, loved, protected. He reminded me that what my sister was doing wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. Abandoning her children, blackmailing me with false medical claims? That's serious. He told me I needed evidence, proof. He suggested I call her back and secretly record the conversation. Try to get her to repeat the threat. That way, I'd have something concrete if I ever needed to report her. It scared me because he was right. I knew my sister was unhinged. She had no moral compass. If anyone could stoop that low, it was her. Despite feeling completely drained, I decided to follow through. I wanted to protect myself. And more than that, I wanted to protect those boys, too. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew I wasn't going to let her steamroll me forever. Even through the chaos, I still wanted my nephews to feel safe. And I wasn't going to let their mom, or mine, destroy every last shred of stability I had left.
I knew exactly what it felt like to be a child in a home where you weren't wanted, and I never wanted my nephews to feel that way. They were just innocent boys caught in the crossfire of their mother's chaos. That wasn't their fault. Later that day, I went downstairs and played video games with them for a while. Multiplayer, first-person shooters. They were so surprised I actually knew how to play. They giggled and cheered as they watched me rack up wins, and for the first time that weekend, I actually had fun. Real fun. Not forced or awkward, just easy, joyful laughter. We ordered pizza and had a silly contest to see who could eat the most pepperoni slices. It hit me then, unexpectedly. I loved these boys. They were nothing like their mom. Even though she clearly hadn't been the best parent, they were polite, gentle, and sweet. It took a little time, but once they came out of their shells, they were funny, well-mannered, and so eager to connect. As we hung out that afternoon, I noticed their clothes didn't fit right. My older nephew's pants were too short, and they both had holes in their socks. When I checked the rest of the clothes my sister had packed, everything was either too small or worn out. I wasn't surprised. My sister was a neglectful, cheap parent. So I decided to take them to the mall. That trip nearly broke me. Not from stress, but from joy. Watching them light up, running from store to store, asking about video games, laughing as they tried on clothes, they were so alive and so starved for kindness. I remembered what it felt like to grow up neglected, to be told you didn't deserve anything. I wanted them to know they did. So, anytime they pointed to something they liked, we went in. I bought them new wardrobes that fit comfortably and made them feel good, and when we passed a gaming store, I bought them both brand new Nintendo Switches. They broke down crying right there. They hugged me so tightly, and I felt tears prick my own eyes. On the ride home, my older nephew started crying again. I gently asked if he was okay. Through wet eyes, he looked at me and asked, "Why are you being so nice to us? What did we deserve it?" That question shattered me. I told him, "You don't have to do anything to deserve kindness. You're kids, and you're my boys too. You deserve to be happy just because you exist." He started crying harder. Then he told me he was angry at his mom for keeping us apart. I took a deep breath, trying not to cry too. I told him I was sorry we hadn't gotten to know each other sooner, but I was really glad he and his brother were here now, and I meant it. That night, they both started opening up to me about life at home. They told me their mom could be mean, that she yelled a lot and called them names, that she and her boyfriend fought all the time. I'd always suspected it, but hearing it in their own voices made it real. My heart cracked open. When we got back home, I made a big homemade dinner for all of us. The boys ate happily, then curled up in the living room and played on their new Switches until bedtime. I quietly slipped away to my room to carry out the plan my boyfriend had helped me make. It was time to get proof. I called my sister, trying to stay calm, even though every nerve in my body was screaming. I wanted to curse her out. I wanted to tell her what a failure of a mother and sister she was, but I held back. I brought up CPS again, and, just like we hoped, she took the bait. She snapped. She repeated the threat, her voice dripping with venom. She said she'd get me fired, that she'd tell my boss I wasn't taking my bipolar medication. Then she said something even worse. I don't care if it's true or not. No one's going to know I'm lying. They'll believe me, not some crazy, sick freak like you. You don't deserve that job anyway. I sat there in silence, the phone still recording. Every word she said was like a dagger, but I had what I needed now. Evidence. Evidence that my sister wasn't just manipulative. She was dangerous, and I wasn't going to let her destroy my life any longer.
Honestly, I think my sister might have been on something during that call. Drugs, alcohol, who knows. She sounded strung out, incoherent, just repeating insane phrases like a broken record. After I got the recording I needed, I hung up. Her final words kept echoing in my mind. You don't deserve anything in this life. Nothing. Over and over again. But I pushed her voice out of my head and immediately checked my phone. The entire call had recorded successfully. I had clear, undeniable evidence. My sister threatening to make false medical accusations to sabotage my job. It was chilling, and my boyfriend had been right. Getting this recorded was brilliant. Once I calmed down a bit, I tucked my phone away, wiped my face, and tucked my nephews into bed. The next morning, before they even woke up, I called CPS the moment their phone lines opened. I explained everything. I told them how my estranged sister had abandoned her children with me, lied about the circumstances, and then used manipulation and blackmail to try to force me to care for them against my will. I even told them I had a recording. The agent I spoke with was shockingly understanding and professional. They listened to the recording, and after a moment of silence, the agent said that it was clear my sister was using coercion to avoid her parental responsibilities and had committed multiple offenses. She said they'd be opening an investigation immediately and that my sister would be contacted as soon as possible. I was shaking by the time I hung up. It had taken everything in me to make that call. I spent the rest of the day trying to recover emotionally and focus on the kids. Relaxing, bonding, making sure they felt safe and happy. The next day, my mom called, and I don't even know why I picked up. I guess I was still emotionally raw, still reeling from everything and craving resolution that I knew I wouldn't get. We ended up getting into another screaming match over the phone. In a moment of anger, I let it slip. I told her I'd contacted CPS and that finally my sister was going to face consequences for how she treated me and her own children. My mom hung up immediately. As soon as I heard the line go dead, I knew exactly what had happened. She was calling my sister. There was no doubt in my mind. She was going to warn her, try to put her 2 steps ahead as always. The same old pattern. Protect the golden daughter, throw the ugly one under the bus. That night, I didn't sleep. My heart was racing the entire time. I had done the right thing, but I knew I had also started a war. The next morning, I went to work on autopilot. When I got in, the receptionist told me my supervisor had scheduled a meeting with me before lunch. It was marked urgent. My stomach dropped. I knew it was happening. I cracked my knuckles to keep my hands from shaking as I walked into the meeting room. Inside were my 2 direct supervisors and someone I'd never met before, a higher up. All of them were sitting there with tight expressions, suspicion in their eyes. I felt like I was on trial. They told me I'd been reported. A trusted source from within my family had contacted the company and claimed I was off my medication for a severe mental illness. They said they were given details, dramatic ones, about past mental health episodes and that there was concern I could have a psychotic break in the office. What they didn't expect, what my sister didn't expect, was how ready I was. I had known this was coming. She had always wanted to destroy me, and being able to strip me of my success, my career, that would be the ultimate revenge for her. The ultimate screw you to the little sister she always hated. Even if I hadn't been watching her kids or called CPS, she would have used this threat again and again anytime I dared to say no. So in a strange way, I was relieved. At least it was happening now, out in the open. I opened my briefcase and calmly handed out folders to each person in the room. Inside were signed, notarized letters from my doctor and therapist confirming that I was actively and responsibly managing my condition. I had documentation going back nearly 5 years, regular appointments, prescription records, compliance reports, all of it, thorough and indisputable. They flipped through the paperwork and the energy in the room shifted. I watched it happen. The suspicion gave way to something closer to awkwardness, maybe even guilt. I didn't let up. I explained that a member of my family had been harassing me and blackmailing me after abandoning 2 children with me under false pretenses and that I had reported her to CPS. I let them know clearly and calmly that I had documented her threat and that if this escalated further, I would not hesitate to involve legal counsel. The meeting ended with mumbled thanks and apologies. I walked out with my head held high, because finally, for the first time, I wasn't the one being silenced. I wasn't the one being punished for existing. I told my supervisors I had never missed a prescription pickup, not once. My medication had been consistent, as had my moods. I provided verification from my primary care physician, my psychiatrist, and my therapist. It wasn't just my word. They had medical documentation going back years. I gave them a clear, professional explanation of the situation, brief but honest. I explained that I had been dealing with ongoing issues with my sister, who herself had a documented history of mental health struggles. I emphasized that her claims were completely unfounded, motivated by personal vendetta, and unsupported by any facts. Everything I said was backed by the documents in their hands. At first, they took a while to flip through everything, but as soon as they saw how thorough my paperwork was and that I had support from multiple licensed MDs and specialists, their tone changed immediately. They seemed visibly relieved. One of them even apologized for calling me into the meeting and explained that they just had to do their due diligence. Then, to my complete shock, one of my supervisors actually congratulated me on the amazing quarter I had just completed and bragged about my numbers to the others. I couldn't believe it. I had walked into that meeting thinking my career might be over, and I walked out practically glowing. I was giggling as I left the office. Giggling! I couldn't help it. I kept smiling the whole rest of the day, just thinking about how my sister's pathetic little scheme had completely backfired. As soon as I got back to my car, I called her. I was practically crying with laughter as I told her how the meeting had lasted all of 15 minutes. I told her how unhinged and ridiculous she had sounded over the phone, and how none of them believed her for even a second. She absolutely lost it. She called me a liar. She said I knew I had been fired and that I was just trying to save face. That only made me laugh harder. I told her she had failed, just like she had failed at everything else in her life. I told her the only skills she had left as a woman pushing 40 were lying and failing, and that even her own kids were disappointed in her. That was the last straw for her. She started screaming, calling me every name in the book: bitch, snake, traitor. She said I had betrayed her, that I was going to regret everything, and that she was hopping on the first flight back to deal with me. Her voice was shaking with rage. I hung up, still laughing. But that high didn't last. When I got home and saw my nephews' faces, relaxed and smiling from a peaceful afternoon, it hit me that this whole thing wasn't over, not even close. My sister was coming back, from another country, furious and completely unhinged. And the scariest part, she had nothing left to lose. I started to worry, not just for myself, but for the boys. Had I made a mistake by calling CPS? Should I have kept them hidden from their mother for longer? I hated thinking like that, but deep down, I wished my sister had lost her passport overseas and never come back. I'd grown so attached to my nephews over the past few days. It was fast and intense, but it felt real. They were kind, open-hearted kids, and they reminded me of everything I had needed and never gotten as a child. I couldn't stand the thought of them going back into my sister's care. I didn't want to say goodbye. I didn't want to watch them be handed back to a mother who only knew how to perpetuate the very same cycle our own had passed down. I checked in on them that night while they were sleeping. I stood in the hallway with tears rolling down my face, trying to cry as quietly as I could. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve her. The next day was pure chaos. I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on my front door. It wasn't knocking. It was like someone was slamming a sandbag into the door over and over again. I rushed to the door, heart pounding, and there she was, my sister. And next to her stood a man, massive, easily 6'5", pushing 300 pounds. One of his hands was the size of my entire head. He didn't say a word, just stood there like a wall of violence.
I could barely see my mother standing behind him, the man who had just appeared at my door, towering and stone-faced. Before I could even open my mouth to tell them to get the hell off my property, he slammed his hand down on my shoulder and shoved me to the ground with the kind of force that makes your bones vibrate. I collapsed to the floor, pain blooming in my shoulder, and could only watch as my sister, my mother, and this complete stranger stormed into my house like it was theirs. I started screaming at my sister for bringing this man, at him not to touch me again, but he either didn't speak English or pretended not to. He just stood there, stone cold, like a silent wall of intimidation. Later I'd learn he only spoke Russian. Then I realized she'd beaten CPS to my house. They were scheduled to arrive around 11 a.m., but it was barely 8 a.m., and my sister had already turned the morning into a war zone. The yelling had woken my nephews, and I saw them appear in the hallway outside the guest room, blinking, sleepily, and clearly scared. I tried to stand, to get between them and the stranger. I couldn't let him near them. But my sister barked at him, "Put them in the car." The man moved toward the boys. It was chaos. My nephews started crying, pleading, "Please, Mom, can we stay here?" I reached for my oldest nephew, trying to pull him away from the giant man's grasp. That's when it happened. He grabbed the side of my head and slammed it into the wall. The world spun. I saw stars. I collapsed again, dizzy, dazed, in too much pain to do anything as I watched him carry both boys out of the house like they were luggage. I could barely move. My head throbbed. I looked up through blurred vision to see my mother standing in the hallway, crying. But she said nothing. She followed them out. Before she left, my sister walked over to where I lay on the floor, clutching my head, and she spit directly in my face. It was the most degrading, disgusting thing anyone has ever done to me. I'll never forget the way she looked in that moment. Empty, rabid, like she wasn't even human anymore. They all got into a giant black Suburban I'd never seen before and drove off. No goodbyes, no shoes for the boys, no clothes, not even breakfast. They left everything, just vanished, like it was some covert operation. I couldn't breathe. My heart ached so deeply I thought it might stop beating. I had a full-blown anxiety attack, the kind that crushes your chest and makes the walls feel like they're closing in. I never thought it would hurt so much to care about someone. But I loved those boys. I loved them deeply. All I wanted was to protect them, to make sure they had the kind of care and affection I never got. And now they were gone. They were out there, scared, barefoot, hungry, in a car with a violent stranger and my psychotic sister, and my mother, who had stood by silently and let it happen. Once the worst of the panic passed, and I could breathe again, I knew I had to snap into action. I couldn't wait. Every second counted. I called the police immediately. To my surprise, they already knew about the open CPS investigation. I told the officer everything, every horrifying detail of what had just happened in my home. My voice was trembling, but I tried to hold it together. I described the man, the vehicle, the exact sequence of events. I racked my brain to remember every single detail. And somehow I did. Thanks to my job, I've trained myself to notice the things most people miss, and that day it saved me. I remembered the full license plate number of the Suburban, every letter, every digit.
I described the man's height, his size, his accent. I told them what my sister and mom were wearing. I told them about my sister's erratic behavior, how she seemed feral, her eyes wild and bloodshot. I was convinced she was high on something, maybe stimulants. Whatever she'd been doing overseas, I didn't doubt that drugs were involved. I had always known my sister was unstable, but this wasn't just instability anymore. This was dangerous, violent, unhinged. She had snapped, and now she'd taken 2 innocent little boys with her. I hung up the phone and tried to take my mind off things, but I couldn't focus on anything. Not sleep, not food, not TV, not even a nap. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were my nephews' faces, confused, scared, pleading. I couldn't think about anything else except whether they were okay, whether they were safe, whether they knew how much I loved them. My thoughts spiraled. I kept thinking about my mom, how she had spent her entire life making excuses for my sister, enabling her every destructive behavior. It hit me how much that protection had turned my sister into someone truly evil. And then, of course, I started thinking about my sister's mysterious trip, where she went, what kind of things she'd done, whether the sugar daddy was real, and if so, how much he had paid her. Was the money really worth it to her? Worth leaving her kids? Worth abandoning any last shred of dignity or responsibility? But mostly I kept thinking about what it would be like if it was just me and the boys. I had space, I had money, but now, more than anything, I had the heart for them too. I had room for them in my life, and I wanted them there. The more I let myself imagine it, the more I wanted it. Just us, a real family, one built on love and safety, not abuse and neglect. If this ever went to court, I thought, what would a judge see? One woman with degrees, a stable income, a penthouse office, and another woman fresh off a trip with her sugar daddy, high out of her mind and arrested for assaulting police officers. But no matter how hard I tried to stay positive, the darker thoughts kept creeping in. Was that giant man at my door her sugar daddy? Was he alone with my nephews now? Was he hurting them? Did they have shoes? Did they eat breakfast? I didn't even realize how much time had passed. I had just been lying on the couch staring at the ceiling, lost in thought, when I finally got a call back from the police. It was the same officer I had spoken to earlier. He had updates. They'd been searching for hours. Then finally, they found the Suburban. 3 police units had been sent to the scene because they knew the man was already violent, and they were right to prepare for the worst. The officer told me that when they attempted to pull the car over, the man bolted out of the vehicle, even with firearms drawn on him. He tried to charge an officer and was shot in the thigh after punching 2 officers and giving a female officer a black eye. My sister didn't exactly stay calm either. She physically attacked the officer who tried to cuff her. I sat there stunned, trying to picture it, my insane sister and that enormous man brawling with cops on the shoulder of a highway. It felt surreal, like something out of a bad reality show. But this wasn't TV. This was my life. The officer kept talking, but my mind was still catching up when he said something that made me freeze. Your sister wants to use her one phone call on you. I was speechless. She wants to call me? He confirmed it, said she'd been screaming about it, said she wanted to ask for bail money. I asked the officer if he thought she was going to ask for money, and he said, honestly, yes, that's exactly what she wanted. I laughed, sharp, bitter, then told him she could rot in that cell for all I cared. I wasn't taking the call. He chuckled knowingly and wrapped up the conversation, but my chest still felt like it was made of bricks. Even though my sister was finally where she belonged, behind bars, I couldn't feel relief, because my nephews were still in the system. CPS had them in temporary protection, which meant they were safe, but I didn't know where, and that uncertainty was eating me alive. On top of all of this, I only had 1 week left before my trip to Australia, one that had been planned for nearly a year. Thousands of dollars already spent, plane tickets, hotels, excursions, all non-refundable. And worst of all, this trip was supposed to be the first time I met my boyfriend's parents. Canceling would not only be a financial disaster, it would also look terrible to his family. I had been dreaming of this moment. I saw a future with this man. I wanted to marry him someday. And the last thing I wanted was to give his family the impression that I was unreliable or unstable before I even got the chance to make eye contact with them. Still, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. I called CPS, desperate to speak with the boys, but this time I was connected to a different department, one that wasn't nearly as cooperative. No matter how much I explained that I was their aunt, that I was stable, that I had been the only person taking care of them recently, they wouldn't budge. They wouldn't even let me talk to them. I hung up the phone, shattered all over again. I had no energy left to argue, no words left to beg. I felt emptied. The rest of the week was a blur of tearful moments, me trying to force myself to pack, to plan, to go through the motions. I kept bursting into tears at random times thinking about the boys, wondering if they were safe, if they were scared, if they missed me. All I wanted was to hug them again. All I wanted was to bring them home. I felt awful. My boyfriend and I had been excited about our trip to Australia for months, and now that it was finally here, all I could think about was my nephews. Every conversation we had in the week leading up to my flight ended up circling back to how anxious, distracted, and drained I felt. My boyfriend, as always, was endlessly kind and supportive, but I was furious that my sister had managed to wreck my life from across the globe. One selfish decision to run off with some sugar daddy had sent a bomb through everything: my peace, my schedule, my trust in my family, my heart. I was grateful that my job had stood by me through her malicious attempt to get me fired, but just thinking about how eager she was to ruin my career, the one thing I had built on my own, made me feel gutted, betrayed. I no longer trusted anyone in my family. Not even my father, who hadn't said a word despite knowing everything that was going on. Spineless, just like my mom. And my mom? She didn't even care about her own grandchildren. She had enabled every one of my sister's reckless choices, and now, because of that, 2 innocent little boys were in the custody of strangers. The morning of my flight, I was sitting at the airport bar, 2 cocktails deep, trying not to cry. I pulled out my phone and looked through pictures of my nephews from when they stayed with me. We had taken silly photo booth pictures together at the mall, and just seeing their goofy little faces again undid me completely. I started crying, hard, again. But that moment was also a turning point. I decided that would be the last time I cried, until I was back home. I told myself I was going to try my absolute best to enjoy this trip. I had a life too. I had worked hard for this moment. I couldn't let my sister steal it from me. And thank God I went. The trip was magical. I hadn't seen my boyfriend in months, and the second he saw me at the airport, he ran up and picked me up princess style. I felt like I could finally exhale. After everything I'd been through, just being wrapped in his arms made me feel held, loved, and safe. He spent the whole trip catering to me, making sure I was okay, reminding me I wasn't alone. Meeting his family went perfectly. They were warm, fun, and full of energy. We did sightseeing, nature hikes, and lots of bonding. One day, he took me on a private hike to a hidden waterfall. We skinny dipped and swam, kissed, laughed. It was one of the most romantic, healing days of my life. Everything I'd been afraid of before I left faded into the background, for a little while at least. But, of course, the nightmare resumed the moment I got back home. A few days after I landed, I went to the local police station and officially pressed charges against my sister and my mother for breaking and entering. That stranger they brought with them had assaulted me in my own home, literally picked me up and tossed me aside so they could barge in. I wasn't letting it slide. At the station, I also got an update. The CPS investigation into my sister was still ongoing. I was so frustrated. How is it not resolved yet? If they had just sat down with my nephews for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, they would have understood the truth, what those boys had been through. Not to mention my sister had just been arrested with a violent man who attacked multiple police officers. If that wasn't enough to prove she was unfit, what was? I left the station that day with a strange mix of emotions. Satisfied that I had finally taken legal action against my family, but still heartsick over the unresolved investigation. I kept worrying about my nephews. Even if foster care was better than living with my sister, it still wasn't ideal. They were with strangers. They were probably scared, disoriented, and alone. And I couldn't stop thinking about the morning my sister took them. She hadn't even let them put on their shoes. My youngest nephew had a little plush dog he brought everywhere. He had forgotten it in the chaos. I had been sleeping with it ever since. Some mornings, just waking up and seeing it next to me made me cry. That little dog was a piece of him, and he didn't have it anymore. The thought of them walking out of my house barefoot, without breakfast, without their clothes, without me, broke me over and over. And all I wanted, was to make it right.
I felt completely powerless until CPS finally made their decision. It happened about a month after my sister's arrest. I had called them every single day, demanding updates, pushing for answers, and begging them to listen. Then finally, they reached a conclusion. Both of my nephews were officially being removed from my sister's custody and placed in permanent protective care. At first, I was annoyed when the CPS agent explained this to me. How is that any different from what's already been happening? I asked. They clarified that the legal change meant my sister was now not only being taken to court, she would also have to appear before a judge and formally fight if she ever wanted custody again. That's when something clicked. I asked if it was likely she'd win if she tried to regain custody, and the agent told me, "It depends. If any other suitable relatives step forward and file for custody, the court would consider them first." And I knew instantly what I had to do. I opened a separate case. I filed to take custody of my nephews. I didn't care how long it would take. I didn't care how expensive the legal fees would be. I hired the best custody lawyer I could afford, because I wasn't just fighting for a legal win. I was fighting for my boys. But before the custody case could even begin, the first legal battle was against my sister for breaking into my home, for the physical assault, for what she and that stranger had done to me. Some people might judge me for taking my own sister to court. Let them. Truthfully, I would have fist-fought her in a Wendy's parking lot at that point. But I knew if I wanted any shot at getting custody, I had to follow the law. And at the end of the day, all I wanted was her out of the way and my nephews home with me. The first day of trial was surreal. I hadn't seen my sister since the morning she barged into my house and let a man attack me, since the moment she spat in my face as I lay dazed on the floor. To say it was a tense reunion would be an understatement. As the trial began, the judge made an announcement in the courtroom acknowledging that I had opened a separate case for full custody of my nephews. That was apparently the first time my sister was hearing about it. Her public defender must not have told her. And my sister? She's never handled bad news well. She turned her body toward me slowly like a predator, screamed my name, and launched herself at me like some kind of rabid animal. She clawed at my face, tried to rip chunks of hair from my scalp. The bailiff pulled her off quickly, but not before she sank her teeth into my forearm. Hard. It was one of the worst pains I'd ever felt. The bite was deep and disgusting, and it got infected days later. But all of that was minor compared to the satisfaction of knowing she had just sealed her fate, right there in front of the judge. It took almost 2 years for all her criminal charges to process, but eventually it was done. With all her offenses stacked against her, child endangerment, assaulting an officer, breaking and entering, battery, she was sentenced to life. No parole, no leniency, her chances at appeal were abysmal. She wasn't seeing the light of day anytime soon. As for my mother, I never dropped the breaking and entering charges against her either. The only reason she stayed out of prison was because she agreed to testify against my sister. She took the stand, sobbing with her trademark crocodile tears, and blamed my sister for everything. Every lie, every action, every choice. And you know what? I loved watching her throw her golden child under the bus. After a lifetime of protecting her, of sacrificing me at the altar of her daughter's ego, my mother finally had to turn on her. And I knew as I sat there in that courtroom, looking up at her fake tear-streaked face, that was the last time I was ever going to see her. I was done. Done with both of them. I had seen enough to last a lifetime. My sister had turned my world upside down and dragged me through hell. She had weaponized my trauma, endangered her children, and tried to destroy everything I'd worked for. All for what? A vacation with a sugar daddy? She had turned my life into a never-ending legal war. But I was still standing, and I just wanted my normal life back.
The custody battle dragged on longer than I ever imagined. After my sister was locked up, her ex, the boy's birth father, and his family came out of nowhere, suddenly interested in fighting me for full custody. It turned the case into another long, drawn-out legal war. But I didn't care. There wasn't a force on earth that could keep me from my nephews now. Not anymore. It took almost 2 more years, courtroom after courtroom, paperwork, testimony, evaluations. I poured everything I had into it. Every dollar, every ounce of strength, every moment of hope. And in the end, I won. I was awarded full custody. I'll never forget the day they came home. Their smiles were bigger than the sun. They ran up the front steps and into my arms, hugging me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. I had prepared bedrooms for each of them, decorated with care, love, and everything I had learned about what made them happy. Posters, books, toys, comfort, safety, home. My youngest nephew sprinted into his room and immediately gasped when he saw his long-lost Nintendo Switch sitting on the shelf. Then he turned and saw what was on his bed, his little plush doggie, the one he hadn't seen since that awful day they were taken. His eyes welled with tears as he ran straight into my arms and hugged me with everything he had. I dropped to my knees and held him tight. A moment later, my eldest nephew joined us, quiet at first, then burying his face into my hair as he hugged me from behind. We sat like that, the three of us, just holding each other, crying together in a knot of love and relief. And then, through his tears, he pulled back, looked me in the eyes, and whispered, "I knew it, Auntie. I just knew you'd come back for us one day." I don't think I'll ever hear more powerful words for the rest of my life. Because in that moment, everything, the courtrooms, the heartbreak, the years of chaos and pain, it all fell away. What remained was simple and sacred. We were finally home, together.